Hello, everybody, and welcome to Todd and Shane's Cloudy Podcast, episode 452, recorded live March 11th, 2020. Now, you will notice that there is only me today, Mark in the chat room, very astute, noticing just me. Probably just going to be me for a while. Shane has been busy with his day job, and it has, we've been trying to figure out, when he can do what and all this. So I talked to him this morning, and he's got some stuff going on at work, and so it's probably going to be just me for a while. I think most people would agree that is a positive change. We'll see. Obviously, anytime Shane's not doing anything on Wednesday, he's welcome to join in. But I think going forward, it'll probably just be me for a while. Now, probably change the title on the podcast a little bit, we'll see. But for now, I have kicked Shane out. I have revoked his access. His key card no longer works at the door. All those things changed all the passwords. I will never speak his name again. That's where we're at. So Lori in the chat room says, upgrade? Absolutely. No doubt about it. Another production note, I was several podcasts behind. I got on a tear a couple of weeks ago and produced a bunch of podcasts and then realized how obnoxious that was, that if you were subscribed to the podcast, they all started pinging up and, they all blew up on YouTube and all that. So I've got a bunch produced and then I forgot to publish them. So I'm really close. So now today I'll be just a couple behind, but expect to see a couple of flurry of those coming out in the next couple of days as I try to time them. I'll probably publish one today, publish one tomorrow, something like that. But I got into a zone, I was in the groove, and then I'm like, that's just going to blow up everybody's podcast stuff. So, but there will not be any lost episodes. Every episode that has been aired will be available for you in all of your favorite podcast apps, YouTube, all of those places. Just gotta get them out there. So, got some topics this week, a lot of tech stuff, a bunch of things have been going on. So part of how this works behind the scenes in the podcast production studios, lots of moving parts and gears and steam and all that. But one of the things that I do is after the podcast airs, I open up another tab in OneNote. OneNote is the engine that makes all of this work. Open up a tab in OneNote, start pasting topics in. So I've got some topics in here that I've been wanting to talk about for a couple of weeks and just haven't done it. The first one is Microsoft published in January. So this is only March. How bad is this? In January, that in Office 365, in SharePoint, when you share a file, the people with existing access will be the default when you share a file, as opposed to specific people, or honestly, I've forgotten what the default was before that. This brings up a couple of things. One is a question that I've gotten more than once when setting a customer up with Office 365 and going through and showing them all the great things. I share a file, I'm like, well, we've got this here, and you can share it with someone that has existing access. And more than once I've gotten the question, why would you want to share it with someone who you have already shared it with? Why would you want to share it with someone who already has existing access? And now not only do we want to do that, now we want to make that the default, so it's even sillier. Why would we do that? The reason that we have the ability to share with people with existing access is to essentially, that's a way to give them the link easily. So people have access to a lot of things on Office 365 that they may or may not view because they have access in groups or whatever. And it's very possible that if I'm collaborating with somebody, collaborating with Lori, she may already have access to something, but I kind of want to start that conversation. I want to get the ball rolling on whatever this document is. So that's why share with somebody who has an existing access is there as an option. And now the default, the idea being that I don't want to alter permissions unless I specifically mean to. So that shows up. I put Lori's name in. She already has access, so nothing's changed on the back end. I put a little note in, here's the proposal, whatever, sends it off. That's going to be the default. That is something that can be changed in the SharePoint tenant administration, but that will be the default. And I think it's a good security measure so that people won't accidentally be sharing things that they don't mean to share. So just another way that the software is getting easier to use. I like when they make changes like this. And I'm sure they've got telemetry on, when people click share, what do they end up doing, so they can kind of look at that and compare how many people that's inconveniencing, because now if you don't do that a lot, now that's an extra step for you if you don't change the default in the tenant admin stuff. But that's a good change, so share with people with existing access. And again, it's good to just kind of talk about that because that does seem like a silly thing. Why would we want to share it when it's all already been shared? So I do like that one. Another note that I have had in here for a couple of weeks is a blog post that I published a while back called Installing Web Apps on Chromium Edge. So those of you that have been watching the podcast for a while know that I have been playing with the Chromium Edge, affectionately referred to as Credge from here on out. When Windows 10 came out, it came out with a new browser called Edge, which was horrible, that nobody liked. I suspected when Windows 10 came out, the first time I used Edge, the only reason that they put Edge in Windows 10 was to make Internet Explorer look better by comparison. I figured it was all just trying to set the bar a little lower so that Internet Explorer could actually get over it. Everybody used something else anyway. They used Firefox, they used Chrome, they used whatever. Edge never really caught on. Microsoft was trying to do some different things with it, markup and all that, and it never caught. For me, I used it once, and it didn't work with the extensions that I used every day, so it was a non-starter. I couldn't do it. And that's one of the problems. Microsoft has adopted this new MVP, a minimum viable product strategy with a lot of products that they're doing. They put something out in market as soon as it is minimally viable, and then they improve on it, they iterate on it once it's out there using feedback from the field and all of that. The problem with that philosophy is that not everybody agrees on what is minimally viable, and you only get one chance to make a first impression. For me, Microsoft and I had a differing view on what the minimum viable product is for a new web browser, and they thought it was viable, and when I opened it up, it was not. Again, it didn't support the extensions that I used all the time, and my first impression was, wow, this Edge on Windows 10 is kind of crappy, and I quit using it. And I used to joke for a long time the only reason that I would ever use it was to go to getchrome.com so that I could download Chrome on whatever box that I was on. But then I finally got sick of even using it for that, so then I just got some PowerShell that would download the Chrome installer, so I didn't even use it for that. Edge was pretty terrible. Last year at Ignite, when I was talking to Mark, we were looking at some things, and he had been using Credge, the Credge previews at that point for a while, and spoke highly of them. So I started poking around with Credge, and it wasn't bad. It was based on the same browsing engine as Chrome, a thing called Chromium. So it was very similar to Chrome, but Microsoft took the Chromium bits and then made some Microsoft-specific things that sat on top of it. So it didn't have a lot of the issues that the previous Edge had. And I used it a little bit, and it was pretty good, but it had a couple of deficiencies that I didn't like, mainly around profiles and syncing and all of that. They got most of that ironed out here a couple of months ago, sometime in January, I think. So now I can sync my Azure AD accounts, my Hotmail accounts, and all that. I have 3 main machines that I use, and the syncing it's imperative for me. I couldn't give up a browser, Chrome, that did the syncing for one that didn't, given the way that I work these days. So I started moving to to Credge. I actually set it as my default browser on all my boxes like a month ago and have been happy with that. I don't really miss Chrome at all. And so now I'm starting to pick up some of the fun things you can do. One of the great things they do with Chrome is Edge, every time they update it, they've got this page that tells you what they added. And it's been great for discovering new features. One of the things that I discovered here a month or so ago was something that I had been desperately needing because of my dislike for another Microsoft product, Teams. And that is, so let me rewind back. I didn't like Teams because when you switch contexts, so you can be logged into multiple teams and multiple tenants and all of that, and when you switch between tenants on Teams, it takes forever. I mean, it literally takes, 10, 15 seconds potentially to do that. And if you're in some kind of a video call, when that happens, it will hang up your call. It is a horrible experience. And you can't have multiple windows inside of Teams like you could with Skype. So I couldn't have a window open with Mark and a window open with Shane and a window open with whatever. I'd have to switch between them all. It was very painful. I dislike Teams a lot. So one of the techniques that I would use to manage that is if I was in a call, I would open up a browser and point it to teams.microsoft.com. And the Teams web client's not bad, and it's gotten better over the months. So I already had that built into my workflow. So after I started using Credge, I was doing that. And I noticed at one point I went up to the menu to do something, and there was this new menu item, Install Site as App. So I did that, and that installed Teams as an app that really was an instance of Credge running. And it has absolutely changed the way that I work with Teams. So I always have the Teams full app open, in one window, and the Teams web app, or the PWA, they call it, Progressive Web App, in another window, and juggling my conversations back and forth, and it has absolutely been pivotal for me. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, I can already open it in a browser. What difference does it make? I'm glad you asked. So there's two main differences that make it valuable for me. Number one, when you install an app or site as an app, it creates a icon for that. So I just click an icon. It opens up Credge with Teams, just like an application. I don't have to type anything. I don't have to click bookmarks, whatever. I click the icon, poof, I'm in Teams. So that's way easier. And the second thing that it does that is more important is Chrome Edge understands that instance of Edge is only for Teams, so there's no tabs. So I can have Credge be my default browser. I can have Teams open in Credge as an app, but if I click a link in my email or someplace else, when Credge renders that link, it doesn't do it in the Teams app Credge instance. It does it in my regular browsing instance. So, because that was something I used to do before. I would have Teams running in Chrome, but then I would click a link and it would open in the wrong window. I'd have to pull it out, and it was a big pain. So now that doesn't happen anymore. So that instance of Credge that is Teams is only Teams. Credge understands that. So it has been just a game changer for me. And those things. So I started poking around. So I noticed that Outlook Online had an app, and there's a whole bunch of these. So I finally put a blog post out on that talked about how to install web apps on Chromium Edge, and it's been a pretty positive experience. So if you're experiencing any of those problems with Teams where you want to be in two teams at once, or you want to have one persistent conversation over another, checking out my blog post, and that's at toddclient.com, will help out with that. And I'll have all these links in the show notes when I finally do publish this one. So, been a lot going on in the tech world, and one of my favorite things that has happened in the last couple of weeks is that PowerShell 7 has been released, and I blogged that, so you can get PowerShell 7. That was on the verge of coming out and has been on the verge of coming out since, like Ignite last year. I remember going to a session there with Jeff Snowden and Jason, and just expecting it to be any day now. Well, it finally came out last week or the week before. So I put a blog post on that. The reason that I did that is because there was the PowerShell 7 release and then some other tangential things, and I kind of wanted to get them all in one blog post because there were all these things that I kept meaning to talk about and just hadn't ever blogged about. So I put them all in one spot. So number one is the way to get PowerShell 7. It's complicated to get because it runs on everything now. So you don't just install PowerShell. You got to go to the GitHub, and then you got to decide whether you're going to compile it or use the binary. And then when you decide to use the binary, you have to decide which platform it's on, because it'll run on Mac and Linux and Raspberry Pi and your toaster and your couch. And by the way, Windows. And then when you decide to run it on Windows, then you got to decide which architecture, 32-bit, 64-bit, whatever. So it's a lot of work. It's worth it though. Go to the work. It's worth it. So I've got a link on that so you can install PowerShell 7. One thing that they've done, and Microsoft is horrible with names. I hate that they do this. So first we had PowerShell. Back in the old days, 10 years ago, we had PowerShell, and that was fine. Everybody knew what PowerShell was. And then they started getting a little finicky about it, and they're like, no, it's Windows PowerShell. It's owned by the Windows team. You should call it Windows PowerShell. So I called it Windows PowerShell. Well, when they were listening. When it was just you and I, just intimate things like this, it was just PowerShell forever. And then a few years ago, they decided that they wanted to make PowerShell open source and make it run on a variety of platforms, which I think is a good thing. I support all that. But then it got confusing because which PowerShell were we talking about? There was some pretty significant differences between the platform. So then Microsoft got super fussy about calling it Windows PowerShell, and now it actually made sense. Now there was value to calling it that. So we had Windows PowerShell that ran on, you got it, Windows, and then we had this other PowerShell that they now called PowerShell Core. PowerShell Core would run on Linux and Raspberry Pis and Macs and BOS and all of them, Commodore 64s, whatever. PowerShell Core would run on that. So there was kind of these dueling PowerShells, and they were really similar, but PowerShell Core had this issue that you could only do things that worked across all the platforms. So a lot of the Windows-specific things wouldn't work because it had to work on Linux and all of that. So then we had, we had PowerShell Core 5 and PowerShell Core 6 and so on and so forth. Now PowerShell 7 is out, and it's just PowerShell 7. It's not PowerShell Core. It's not Windows PowerShell. Now we've come full circle, and now it's just PowerShell. So confusing. I feel like I need a map with strings and all of that, but it is just PowerShell. And Microsoft has said now they consider PowerShell 7 to be the PowerShell. When you say PowerShell, you mean PowerShell 7. I'm not quite there yet. I'll talk about why in a minute. But got the blog post out there, so you can get yourself some PowerShell 7. Mark in the chat room has already installed it. I imagine he's going to be very excited once he starts to play with it. Links are in there. Another thing that I've been meaning to mention in the PowerShell space, but just haven't really talked about it, is moving from the PowerShell ISE to Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, or just Code. That is a change that I made several months ago at Mark's behest, because it's obviously VS Code is a very developer-y platform. He's a developer. He feels very comfortable there. I am not a developer. VS Code and Visual Studio and all that, very scary. I don't like to go there unless I'm holding someone's hand. It's very scary. But Microsoft made it clear a couple of years ago that the ISE was a dead product. They would keep shipping it, but they were not going to improve it and not going to make any changes. The VS Code is where they saw PowerShell development. And so I finally begrudgingly got into VS Code, mainly because I was working with some PowerShell with some coworkers, and we needed the Azure DevOps and the GitHub syncing because we were doing all that stuff. And VS Code was the best way to do that. And then without really noticing when it happened, one morning I was in VS Code and kind of saw like the corners of my mouth perking up a little bit. I was smiling. I was having a good time in VS Code. I didn't hate it. And I'm like, I wonder how this happened. And I found out that VS Code was not a bad experience. Like Mark, I've got it in one of my, I've got it in my quick launch down here. I do 100% of my PowerShelling in VS Code these days. And part of what makes that work well is there are some PowerShell extensions for VS Code. They, the highlighting and all of that, the terminal window. If you had that installed a while back and you haven't updated it recently, you should do that. There's a new version now. It supports PowerShell 7. You want that. It also supports the new PS read line, which gives you better syntax highlighting. I still have a separate PowerShell window that I do like my prototyping in. I haven't worked that all into VS Code yet. I'm getting there. I want to be there. I'm working on that. But in that same blog post I mentioned, use VS Code. Here's a link to the extension to use VS Code with. And then finally, the third thing that I list in that blog post is the Windows Terminal Preview. So this is the replacement for the PowerShell host, the CMD, all that kind of thing. It's a tabbed terminal window now. That's been out for a while, like maybe a year, something like that. And I've not used that a lot, again, because I'm trying to figure out VS Code and all that. But this Windows Terminal, it's an app in the App Store. You can download it, and it is just a one-stop shop. You can have CMD. You can have Windows PowerShell 5.1. You can have PowerShell 7. You can have an Azure Cloud Shell. You can have, if you've got any of the Linuxy things installed on Windows 10, you can open up that, and it's all in one window, so it's all a kind of a cohesive experience. Not a bad deal. Still a little rough around the edges. For instance, when you can change fonts and backgrounds and all those kind of things, very flexible. If you go into the settings link in Terminal and click that, what does it do? It opens up a JSON file for you. Now a JSON file that you can edit in VS Code. Highly recommend that. But it's still a little rough. So, but it's worth taking a look at. It's got a lot of good features. And installing code, installing PowerShell 7, none of that removes any options you already have. So you can install code, install PowerShell 7, install the Windows Terminal, but still be able to do things the way that you're used to doing them. So you can go in there, dip your toe in, get a little scared, jump out, jump back in again. Highly recommend that. For the folks that listen to this podcast, PowerShell is probably a big part of their life. Certainly no one's tuning into this PowerShell for Shane, or tuning into this podcast for Shane and I. PowerShell, the way that it's going is VS Code. The way that it's going is the Windows Terminal. So start working yourself into those paths. I think you'll be glad you did. I know now that PowerShell 7 is out and stable and some other things, I will start trying to work Windows Terminal into my daily PowerShelling. Going to be kind of slow going. So talking about that, I mentioned earlier that I was not moving completely over to PowerShell 7, and the reason for that is because most of the commandlets that I use on a day-to-day basis, SPO, Azure AD, PNP, and all that, still require PowerShell 5.1. So in the chat room, Mark had mentioned that he had downloaded PowerShell and was going to try some things with parallel processing and some cloud things. You will probably find that that does not work very well just yet. I've not exhaustively gone through, but I've got a blog post with all the Office 365 modules that I use. I don't know that I got any of them to work in PowerShell 7. And by that, I just meant, I would go in. If the module wasn't installed, I would try to install it, and then I would just try to connect, and it just didn't. Lots of security things. Again, because we're kind of programming against that least common denominator across all the platforms. So for now, all of the Office 365 modules that I use on a daily basis, they all require PowerShell 5.1. But the great news is you can install PowerShell 7 and it doesn't uninstall Windows PowerShell 5.1. They can exist together, so not a big deal. If you do any Office 365 work with PowerShell, I recommend my blog post. If you go to toddclint.com, there's one across the top that has all of the Office 365 modules that I use on a daily basis, and I keep it up to date. They update those things all the time, once a month in a lot of cases. So you can go there, and it's got all the modules that I use, what I use them for, what their prefix is, so they're easy to find in get command, and what command that you can use to install them, all of that. So it's a great blog post. I update it 6 times a month. It's always there. So that's there. So one of the things when you move from the PowerShell ISE to Visual Studio Code is the Visual Studio Code looks radically different. Just everything about it is different and scary. It's dark. The ISE is light. Just way crazy. So one of the things that has been created to help people make that transition is there is a use PowerShell in ISE mode blog post that I stumbled across. And basically it walks you through setting up Visual Studio Code so that it looks and feels like the ISE that you're used to. Well-intentioned. Thomas Maurer is the guy that wrote that, and then he's got a link in his blog post to a Microsoft Docs page that kind of walks through it. Good information to kind of understand how it's all pieced together. I'm not a fan, though, because I really appreciate a lot of the things that VS Code brings to the table. And I think I'm probably better off long-term using the VS Code environment the way that it is and using the terminals and all that. But Thomas has that blog post out there if you want to use it. My recommendation is don't, but read through it and kind of understand where the pieces are. I did have to do some things like to add snippets support. I had to make some changes and all that because I use snippets all the time. Hey, look, it's somebody trying to sell me some insurance or something like that. So don't use that if you can get away with it. Or if you do, at least know how to undo it after you kind of get used to using VS Code. So big blog post on that. That was good content. I hope to keep some of that updated as I move through big exciting times in the PowerShell world. Wanted to talk a little bit towards the end. I would be remiss if I didn't make mention to the worldwide phenomenon that's going on right now and all of the changes that are going on in society. So of course I'm talking about the coronavirus or COVID-19, however you want to refer to it. That has come up because there's been some of these things before, SARS and MERS and Ebola and shark attacks and Spanish flu. This keeps happening. So that in and of itself is not amazing. But what is amazing is with this coronavirus coming through, because of some attributes of it and things that officials are worried about, and the fact that technology is sort of caught up, a bunch of places have made some pretty radical changes to what's been going on. So the most obvious one that has gotten a lot of attention and has impacted me the most is the Microsoft MVP Summit is supposed to be next week. All 3,000 MVPs are invited to come out to Seattle for a week and hang out and just get our nerd on as best we can. That is no longer an on-site event. Most people are saying it's canceled. Technically, it's not canceled. It is now an online event. But for a lot of us, the biggest value of the MVP Summit was getting to hang out with our MVP friends. Can't do that anymore. So it's essentially canceled. It's an online event only, essentially canceled. But the reason that is important is because Microsoft didn't cancel it. The technology, both their technology and home technology and all that, is such that they can make it an online event. Now, obviously, the event hasn't taken place yet, so I don't know how well that has gone off, but it's an option now, and it wasn't an option before. And somewhat as a response to this and the other things, so some MVPs had already made their flights, and we're flying from all kinds of crazy parts of the world, and we're going to be many time zones off from Seattle and all that. So they're like, well, we're just going to show up anyway. We've already got the flights. We've already got whatever. So partially in response to that, partially in response to just trying to be safe in the Seattle area, not only did Microsoft cancel the MVP Summit, they canceled the whole campus. So from what I understand, if you have an office in the Seattle, Redmond area for Microsoft, you have been told to work from home for the next 3 weeks, just to kind of help with some of the self-quarantining, all of that. And again, that is just insane. It's insane that we have a thing that we're dealing with that requires that, but it's also insane that it is technically an option. And so that means that the technology to do that, in this case, obviously Microsoft is expecting everybody to use Teams so we can do virtual meetings and phone calls and all that kind of stuff. But home internet connections are fast enough. ISPs have enough bandwidth. Our equipment from home is good enough. Like, we are all able to do this. We couldn't have done this 10 years ago. A company the size of Microsoft couldn't have just said, everybody work from home for the next 3 weeks. It would have just destroyed business. Now, whether it will or not, we're on the leading edge of this, but I think it's amazing. And a bunch of other places have done this. So other events have been canceled. Google I/O was canceled. South by Southwest was canceled. A lot of those can't be done virtually, but a lot of companies are just saying to their employees, stay home for the next couple of weeks, work from home, and they've already got the systems in place to handle it. So I think that's really, really amazing. Now, one of the things that Microsoft has done to help facilitate that and to make it easier for other companies to make that kind of decision is they've decided to give away the premium features of Microsoft Teams for the next 6 months. So if you were a small company that was using Teams, the free version, because there's been a free version forever, but it didn't have some of the meeting scheduling features that you would need to actually have everybody work from home, for the next 6 months, Microsoft is unlocking all of that. So they're doing everything they can to really make it easy for companies to make that decision to send their employees home if they want to. So for a lot of reasons, making the hard decision to make the MVP Summit an online-only event, to sending their own people home, to now making Teams premium free, Microsoft has really led the charge on helping contain this coronavirus. So they've donated a bunch of money. They've really stepped up. It's been amazing. So I am curious how many people use those premium features. I'm curious how many people will use them after the 6 months is over. And I'm also curious how many people are going to complain in 6 months that these features are going away because they've gotten used to them and they've completely level set and forgotten that they used to be for pay features. So I think I'm going to put a little note in Outlook, and say, hey, in September 15th, of 2020 or whenever this expires, are people complaining about Teams and Microsoft being big meanies? So it's interesting times, and I'm really proud of Microsoft. They're sitting on a pile of cash, and they're using that great position to kind of help these crazy times. So I'm very proud of them. They're doing great stuff. So if you've got free Teams, by all means, check out the premium features. So that sounds like a lot. Like, Microsoft is sending their people home, and they're donating money, and they're donating software. What more could they possibly do? Haven't they done enough? They disagree. They believe that they can do more. They believe that they haven't done enough. So I was poking around the other day and saw that Microsoft has released a crisis communication Power App template. So now you can use Shane's beloved Power Apps and use this crisis communication template that Microsoft has released for free, and use this to communicate with your company in times of crisis, be it something like this or any other crises, but really that will let you quickly get information out to the rest of your company for free. They've done all the work for you. So I'm just like, every morning I get up and I'm like, oh my God, what has Microsoft done today to combat the coronavirus? Haven't these people done enough? So this whole crisis communication Power App was just another thing they've really done a great job with. So if you have Power Apps in your environment, they've also relaxed some licensing on that. And I haven't read up on this much, but some part of Power Apps with alerting used to require a license, but now it doesn't for the next 6 months, something like that. So by all means, look into that. But they've just done a great job. They've really stepped up. It's been amazing to watch. And Lori's been spending a lot of time this week telling people about the template, showing them how to use it. So that's just, more great resources that Microsoft is throwing at this. They're throwing money, they're throwing teams, they're throwing Lori, everything they've got at this. What a great thing for them to do. So that was kind of the big thing. Now I did want to mention one other thing, and I don't want the whole how is Microsoft trying to save the world and literally trying to save the world this time. I don't want this to be overshot and all that, but I did notice I was poking around the other day. A buddy of mine is looking at getting a Tesla, and so he was talking to me about that. I don't know if you guys have noticed. I'm usually pretty quiet about this, but I have a Tesla car, had it for a couple of years. Just love the snot out of it. And if I'm talking to people and if they really pull and they prod and just really beg, sometimes I'll talk about my Tesla in public. Sometimes I usually I'm pretty quiet, pretty demure about that. But he's a friend of mine thinking about getting one. So he and I have been chatting back and forth, trying to figure things out about it. And he mentioned that he saw on the Tesla site, tesla.com, that if you buy a Tesla Model S right now, you get free supercharging for life, which is that whole thing that if you're out on a big road trip and you want to hit one of Tesla's superchargers, you can do that for free if you buy a Model S right now. And I don't know how long that is or if the other models have it. I just know that's what my buddy was looking at. I will tell you that is a great thing. I have the free supercharging with my Model S, and it's like a security blanket when I'm out on the road. Normally, the Tesla supercharging is not that expensive. It varies by spot. So, supercharging in Iowa is probably cheaper than it is in California, something like that. I don't know because I don't pay attention to that. But I do have another app that I use called Teslafy. If you're a Tesla owner and you love the data and the numbers and all that, I highly recommend Teslafy. But Teslafy does go back and figure out how much you would have paid for supercharging had you not been getting it for free. I've had my Tesla for just about 2 years now. I've put 30,000 miles on it, and I think I've used, I can't even begin to guess, a couple $100 worth of supercharging. I'd have to go back and look. So while the free supercharging is nice, it's not a gigantic financial benefit. So if you're looking at another Tesla, don't let this make or break you. But if you are thinking about getting a Tesla, I have a referral code. It does get you some amount of supercharging if it's not free. It gets me a really big grin on my face. I'm like, oh man, another somebody. It looks like you get a $200 or $250 cash reward, all that. So that's just your way. If you want to try to save the world one puff of car exhaust at a time, Tesla's got your back there. They've got free supercharging on Model S's for a while. And if you're not going to use my referral code, for goodness sakes, don't use Shane's. I don't even think he has one. I think if Shane had a referral code, every time you used it, a kitten would have a snack taken away from it. It's horrible. That's the way Shane rolls. So go out, go forth, buy lots of Teslas. Model Y is coming out too. Check that out. Okay, so for the community corner, I got I guess I got one thing going on. Next month, I'm going to be speaking at the Omaha user group, and that's going to be on PowerShell and Office 365 and all these things that I love all together. Probably going to do it remote, but Omaha's like just a 2-hour drive from here, so I might scoot over there and see those folks in person. And then for the bigger conferences, as far as I know, this is all on board right now. In May, I've got the SharePoint conference in Las Vegas, and I'm doing a session on PowerShell. I'm doing a session on site designs. If you have not signed up for the SharePoint conference yet, you can go to sharepointconference.com or sharepointna.com. They've got about 14 URLs. I've forgotten them all. But go to whatever the SharePoint conference URL is of your choice. If you use the promotion code SYMPRAXIS, SYMPRAXIS, you will get $50 off and a handshake from Bill Gates or something, I forget. Not a handshake anymore. We don't do that. Elbow bump from Bill Gates, and just all of my love and admiration. Get in there, use that Sympraxis referral code. We'd like that. And then in June, I'm going over to Europe, going to do the European tour, going to go to Techorama in Belgium, going to be talking about PowerShell there, also be talking about page modernization. For those of you that created pages in Office 365, the OG pages, and now want to move to the new modern pages, I've been doing a lot of work on that with some customers. Going to talk for a while on what that process looks like. I'm going to be doing the SharePoint Exchange Forum in June, and I forget what I'm going to be talking about there, but it'll all be good, probably similar stuff, site designs, all that. And then I might have another event that I need to, I don't want to announce it before it shows up on any websites, but I have another event in Europe in June that I will be visiting as well. So thanks, everybody. I think we would all agree that the podcast today was not any less with the absence of what's his name? I forget now. It's been so long. I can't even remember what his name is, what it looks like. But thanks to everybody in the chat room for sticking around. I'll be there for a bit after I kill the stream. And I will not be here. I'll not be broadcasting live next week. It is spring break. I'm going off, well, hopefully doing some traveling with the family. So I probably will not be here next week, but I will publish some of these the lost episodes. And then I think we'll be back in 2 weeks. So thanks, everybody, and have a good day.